Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a really fascinating topic, the deeply intertwined political web of the Roosevelt family. We're going to untangle their power, trace their literal bloodlines, and see exactly how they reshaped American history. Because, this wasn't just a family that happened to produce a couple of leaders. They were one of America's most prolific political dynasties, and they completely rewired the political fabric of the nation for decades to come. So here's our roadmap. We're going to trace their journey through 5 key phases. 1. Roots of a dynasty. 2. The presidential family web. 3. Shaping domestic politics. 4. Redefining the First Lady. And finally, 5. Global peace and war. We're covering the whole shebang, from their 17th century arrival right up to their unprecedented global influence during World War II.
All right, let's start with Phase 1, Roots of a Dynasty.
To really grasp their 20th century dominance, we have to look at their sheer historical footprint. This political influence didn't just pop up overnight. It was meticulously built over hundreds of years. It all started way back around 1649, when Dutch immigrants Claes and Genetschke arrived in New Amsterdam, which is what we now call New York. Fast forward just a bit, and their son Nicholas, born in 1658, is actually the first to use the anglicized Roosevelt name. And he didn't waste time getting into politics either, serving as a New York City alderman from 1698 to 1701. By 1865, the family is so deeply embedded in the American story that there's actually a perfectly timed photograph of a 6-year-old Teddy Roosevelt and his brother watching Abraham Lincoln's funeral procession right from the window of their Broadway mansion. Talk about a front-row seat to history.
And this dynasty was defined by an incredible, almost mythic physical resilience. You've probably heard this one, but it's just too wild to skip. While out on the campaign trail in 1912, Teddy Roosevelt survived a literal assassination attempt. In a miraculous twist of fate, the bullet was stopped by a folded speech tucked safely into his breast pocket. So, yeah, they were quite literally bulletproof out there on the campaign trail.
Moving right along to Part 2, the presidential family web.
Now, the Roosevelts didn't just build an isolated little dynasty. They were woven into the very DNA of the American presidency. It really makes you wonder, exactly how connected is the Roosevelt family to other U.S. presidents? We all know Franklin and Theodore were related. They were fifth cousins, right? But FDR's familial ties extend far, far beyond just Teddy.
Get this! The crucial point here is a staggering statistical anomaly. Franklin D. Roosevelt was related by blood and marriage to 11 other commanders-in-chief. 11! In a democratic nation that explicitly prides itself on elections rather than royalty, having a family tree that deep in the Oval Office is absolutely mind-blowing.
Just look at this expansive network. We're talking connections to founding fathers like John Adams and James Madison, stretching all the way through to Civil War heroes like Ulysses S. Grant, and early 20th century leaders like Taft. His family tree practically reads like a table of contents for a U.S. history textbook.
The web was so tightly knit that Franklin and his wife Eleanor were actually related themselves. Yep, fifth cousins once removed. Eleanor's father, Elliot, was Teddy Roosevelt's brother. It was all so deeply intertwined that on their wedding day, President Teddy Roosevelt himself gave Eleanor away in honor of his departed brother. They were keeping these incredibly powerful political alliances and Teddy's direct blessing strictly within the family.
Let's look at Part 3, Shaping Domestic Politics.
This massive network allowed the Roosevelts to completely redefine the nation's domestic policies. But believe me, it didn't happen without severe pushback. After Teddy's brand of progressive activism, conservative opponents pushed hard in the exact opposite direction. In fact, during the 1920 election, Warren G. Harding explicitly campaigned on a return to normalcy, which was basically code for a direct rejection of the Roosevelt style of governance.
In that 1920 election was actually a massive hurdle for FDR's early career. Running as the VP for James M. Cox, FDR was blasted by critics as being immature, and they suffered a staggering defeat at the polls. He even shied away from politics for a bit. But, this setback only set the stage for an epic comeback. He bounced back to become governor of New York in 1929, and by 1933, he was in the White House, kicking off an unprecedented 4-term presidency.
Which brings us to Part 4, Redefining the First Lady. While FDR was reshaping the Oval Office, Eleanor fundamentally disrupted everything people expected from a first spouse. Instead of staying quietly in the background, she immediately took action. Literally days into the administration, on March 6, 1933, she hosted the first official press conference ever conducted by a First Lady. And here is the brilliant part. She exclusively invited 35 female reporters. By doing this, she essentially forced news organizations to hire women just so they could cover her activities, a real game changer.
And this wasn't just a one-off PR stunt. Over the next 12 years, Eleanor held an incredible 348 press conferences. 348! That provided a massive, sustained platform to amplify women's voices in the press, totally laying the groundwork for future first spouses to take on active governing roles.
She used that immense influence to elevate other pioneering women, too. People like Frances Perkins, who became the first female cabinet member, and foreign dignitaries like Sung Mei-ling. But my absolute favorite story here involves aviation legend Amelia Earhart. After a formal White House gala in 1933, Eleanor and Amelia, still wearing their formal evening wear by the way, took a spur-of-the-moment flight from D.C. to Baltimore. Eleanor had recently applied for a student pilot's license, and she actually spent time up in the cockpit during the flight.
Let's wrap things up with Part 5, Global Peace and War.
You see, this family's influence simply couldn't be contained within U.S. borders. They actively projected American power globally through some incredible firsts. On one side, we have Teddy Roosevelt, who braved critics to become the first statesman of any kind to win a Nobel Peace Prize in 1906 for brokering peace in the Russo-Japanese War. On the flip side, you have FDR, who in 1943 became the first sitting president to fly aboard an aircraft, literally taking to the skies to coordinate World War II strategy.
And FDR's secret 1943 flight to Casablanca wasn't just some neat piece of aviation trivia. It was a highly dangerous, multi-stop tactical maneuver to avoid German submarines that were making the Atlantic way too dangerous for boats. He boarded a Pan Am flying boat, hopped from Trinidad to Brazil to the Gambia, and then switched to a Douglas C-54 just to meet Winston Churchill in Morocco. This daring journey laid the absolute groundwork for what we now know as Air Force One, proving they were willing to break literally any boundary to shape global history.
So when you step back and look at how effectively they leveraged their deep bloodlines and sharp political acumen to shape the modern world, it's truly awe-inspiring. They went from 17th century Dutch immigrants to leaders holding the highest offices during times of immense global peril. By completely rewriting the rules of the presidency, the First Lady, and global diplomacy, it leaves us with this massive question. Will American politics ever see another dynasty quite as intertwined and transformative as the Roosevelt web? Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope you are leaving today with a whole new perspective on this incredible family.